Yeah, that would have, yeah. Because I, like, the link to the Slack link is actually only specific.
A quick reminder, Wi-Fi information and the URL for feedback surveys are on your schedule. Please remember you can send an email to safety@drupalcorn.org if you have concerns, or if there's an emergency, you can call 911. Thanks for coming to an introduction to Gulp today. Please help me welcome Tim Erickson from Triplo.
Thank you. My name is Tim Erickson. I'm from the Twin Cities. I'm also involved in planning the Drupal camp up there. So we don't have specific plans for next year, but I'd encourage you all to look at that. I have my own small shop called Triplo. A colleague of mine, David Radcliffe, is here at camp with me, and if you bump into him, be sure to say hi. I can be found at St. Paul Tim. That's my Drupal username and my Twitter handle. I'm going to talk today about Gulp for beginners. How many people in here do front-end theming? Okay. And how many, I'd like to have some sense of skill level. How many people use Gulp, something like Gulp already? Just two? How many people know what Gulp is? A few more. So how many don't? Raise your hand if you don't know what Gulp is. That gives me a better sense of where we're at. Okay. That's good. For those of you, well, how many people are using Sass? Of those, kind of a mixture? Okay. So what I want to do today was share some things that some of you might not know about, and it seems like we'll be able to do that because a lot of you seem to be pretty new at this. That's good. Maybe demystify some tools that some of you are working with already a little bit. We can have a bit of a discussion about using these kinds of tools, the pros and the cons, and I don't mind if this discussion wanders a bit, if people have questions, and learn something new.
Sorry, is there any way to turn off the lights in front?
Yes.
So it's easier to see?
That would be helpful. We can apparently do this. Did anything happen?
Yeah.
Was that
back lights dimmed more?
As long as the front lights dim, that's,
Yeah, that's good.
There we go. Thanks, contrast, yay!
Is that better?
Yes.
Okay, great. Very early on in my Drupal camp attending careers, I was thinking about doing sessions, and a good friend of mine said that what he learned was a challenge or an opportunity for Drupal camps was to take something you wanted to learn about and propose a session, and then you got to learn about it if it did it 6, 7 times. Gulp, my background is I've been doing Drupal for about 7 or 8 years. I do a lot of site building and front end work. I can hack around with modules in the back end, but probably I do a lot of project management and client facing stuff too. But I do quite a bit. I do quite a bit of coding or theming. I did. Let's see. I'm going to come back to this. Sort of as I was learning theming in Drupal 7. My colleague recommended I use the Zen theme. Does anybody here use the Zen theme? Right? And to be honest, right, I downloaded the Zen theme, learned a little bit about it, but there was a lot of stuff going on in there that I didn't really know about or understand, and I didn't worry about. The first version of Zen I used, I'm pretty sure would have been 7.3. There wasn't any. This was before there was any Sass in Zen built in, and I went on at some point and started learning about Sass, and it's like by then Zen 7.5 was out. And actually, I should step back because I'm remembering that some of you aren't even using Sass, right? Is there anybody writing CSS that's not using Sass? Is that okay? There's not. So
I'm still learning.
You're still learning. So people have a sense what Sass is, right? Quickly, Sass is a kind of a way to pre-process your CSS to insert things like variables and nested things. So you can do a little bit more. You can automate the building of your CSS, and then you have to pre-process that. Something has to go through, read your Sass files, and create CSS. And originally, in Zen, they included a tool called Compass. And you would run Compass or Compass Watch, and it would go through, read your Sass files, and generate a bunch of CSS for you. Well, I'll sort of demonstrate this in a minute if you haven't done that before. Later on, they moved to Gulp. So suddenly Zen came out with a newer version, and now they're using Gulp. And it's like, okay, now I got to learn a new tool. A lot of what I was getting from themes like Zen were these tools that were built in to Zen that I didn't really understand a lot what was going on, right? It was like I knew I wanted to compile Sass, and I found some instructions, and it said run Gulp Watch, and some magic happened, and then I had CSS. But what all was happening behind the scenes, I didn't fully understand. I got into Drupal 8, and the Zen theme wasn't in good shape. So there was Bootstrap. I started using Bootstrap. Bootstrap had Sass or Less as options. Less is just a different version of Sass, right? It's a different way of processing your CSS. But they were using Grunt, and it's like, I don't want to learn Grunt now. I'm just starting to learn Sass. I've also been working a lot with Backdrop, and I went into Backdrop and I wanted to create a theme, and none of the themes came with sort of Sass built into it. So suddenly it was like I needed to sort of create my own theme and install these tools. And as I said, I'd sort of grown accustomed to just sort of downloading a theme that had these tools built into it and didn't really understand how they worked. And so I have been experimenting recently about actually picking apart my theme and learning how to rebuild a theme. So I actually understand what's in it, what the tools are that's into it, how they work. And in the case of Sass, I have a theme that I've been working on for months, and every time I run Gulp Watch, all of this happens. It's all still happening, and there it ends. And to be honest, at the end, I just want to know that it processed my scene. There was about 250 errors that went by there that I just ignored because I didn't really care about them. They weren't breaking my theme, and I just let them happen. And this felt weird to keep doing that. And so by sort of taking apart and rebuilding my own theme and installing Sass myself, Sass is obviously doing a bunch of things here that either I don't understand or haven't taken the time to understand, or maybe I don't need, but I just went with the flow because it got what I wanted done. So part of what I wanted to do today was talk about breaking this apart and understanding how it is that a tool like Gulp works, how to install it and configure it, and kind of understand what's going on under the hood. This has been very empowering to me, and hopefully will be to some of you. I think I'm certainly open to talking about other things in your theme or other kind of front-end workflow questions. And if I can't answer them, I hope that there might be some other people in the room who can. So I kind of want to just get in. Let me go back. Is there anything here? Let's go back and talk. So Gulp. What Gulp is a toolkit that automates things, and compiling your Sass is just one of them. It can do a lot of other things. It can create a style guide for you. There are automatic plugins for Sass, which will, if you put certain comments into your Sass files, includes the one I've experimented with is KSS style guide, and every time your Sass gets compiled, it will read these comments in your Sass and generate HTML files that demonstrate that are basically a style guide that shows you what your H1s, your H2s, your paragraphs look like, and all of those things. You can use Gulp to aggregate your Sass files or your CSS files instead of so you can break it apart. Right, you want to have a footer Sass file, a header Sass file, and then you want all of those to get combined together, right? Sass helps automate things like that. It can help automate minifying your CSS. right? Making it into a small possible file, so that every time you create, you update your Sass, it updates the CSS and then runs these series of tasks. That's what's going on, and that was what's going on in that GIF I showed you. Is it's going through a whole bunch of stuff and doing a whole bunch of things. I mean, I had a style guide in that site that I never used, but every time I update my CSS, the Sass or the Gulp is recompiling that style guide that I'm not even using, and it's sitting there. So one thing, I can either learn how to use the style guide and make better advantage of it, or I could go in and disable that so it's not working. Any questions? Does anybody relate to this in the room, where you've been working with a tool like Sass or a Gulp and not really understanding it? So, oops. Scam likely. Thank you. Let's turn down my ringer. So we did this. I'm going to put a couple of resources. This theming Drupal 7 with Gulp. This guy wrote a really brilliant blog post that just sort of walks through the step of setting up a new Drupal theme and adding Gulp and Sass and things like that to it. And he does a really good step-by-step, and I'm not going to walk through all of the steps of getting this set up, because there's a really good tutorial there. And some of them are, mostly what I did was just follow his instructions, right? To install Gulp, you need to use Node and run the Node Package Manager. People familiar with Node Package Manager? Again, this is something that it's like every once in a while I'm told I need to install something, and I get a little line of code that I cut and paste, and that line of code says npm install, and probably the first dozen times I did that, I had no idea what Node Package Manager even was or what it was doing. Node Package Manager is just a way of managing code on your site. We use Node Package Manager to add plugins or modules to Gulp. So you have to first install Node and Node Package Manager on your site, and this is the blog post that I looked at. And as if you kind of scan through it, he first of all does a really good job at just sort of talking about basically the same process. I really related to this blog post because he's like, I started doing this. I didn't understand what any of these things were. I started to learn about them, and then he basically says, so here's a really basic description of how you would create or set up a new theme using something like Gulp. And he walks through how to install Node. And that can be a little bit complicated. There's a few, depending on your situation. And then once you get down to installing Gulp, you first installed npm, the Node Package Manager, and then you use that to install Gulp and to any of the modules that go with it. And I will demonstrate a little bit of that in a minute. So I have I gave a link, not share, I wanted to present. The top link is to just a blog post that I'm going to put on the Triplo website that will have links to any of these tutorials and stuff. The slides will also be available, but I think just the links that I'm going to share are probably more important. So there's that. This was a link to that. We talked about what you can do with Gulp. We talked about compiling your Sass, aggregating, things like optimizing images. Also, another thing that Gulp does that I'm going to show you is it can check your Sass for style, see if you've made errors, or if you're sort of following best practices. And it can check your Sass, CSS, JavaScript, and point out errors to you, and build a style guide. So I had this sort of slide that basically kind of shows some of the first couple of steps. Again, these are in the blog post, and I'm just going to get in and actually show you a theme, and we'll look at some of these files, but I'm not going to try to create them from scratch, because that seems a little bit dangerous, and and probably not necessary. I don't expect, people aren't going to be able to come back. I don't expect anybody to go home from this and remember, oh, this is how I use Gulp and how to install it. The main purpose of this is for you to sort of see me work with this stuff and understand how it works. But in order to do it, you'll really probably need to go to these blog posts and walk through the steps. Also, anytime you're installing software like this, I find that it never goes quite perfect, right? Something always goes wrong, and I have to start Googling, well, what do I do when this happens or this error? So that's really all the slides I have. What I kind of want to do is dig in. And what I did for this presentation was I've been working actually in Backdrop with this recently, and I thought for Drupal Camp here I would do a Drupal theme. And I was trying to get a Drupal 8 site set up locally, and I ran into some problems. So I'm working with Drupal 7. The concepts all work the same here. I basically took and set up a bit blank theme. The first time I sort of did this, it was very empowering right after sort of being dependent on things like Zen to realize and not understanding a lot of what's going on. I started to take apart a theme and add pieces back to it. So I sort of at some point took Zen and just said, I'm going to create a blank theme folder and start putting the pieces in there that I want, and then as I recreate it, understand them better. So I'm not just relying on a bunch of magic that's happening in the theme. So what I'm going to do here, I think I need to sit down because I'm going to jump around. So I'm using PHP Storm here, and I created a theme. I called it Triplo, and I basically sort of took Barktic and deleted everything, and then started adding the pieces back in. The only thing that's left of Barktic, I think, is in the info file. I mostly kept the regions. I think I renamed one or two just to make it not Barktic. But anybody who's put together a theme, knows your info file is the basic information about the file that you need. And if you're going to be working with creating your own Sass structure, you need to sort of know, be able to tell the theme where you're putting the CSS and the styles. I have some CSS in here already, but I'm going to go ahead and delete that because really we're relying on Sass to generate our CSS. So I have a CSS file. It's empty. I've told Drupal in the info file where the theme the styles are. I've installed Node Package Manager. I was going to assume you've all done that as well. And I've installed a couple of plugins. And the instructions for installing Node Package Manager basically walks you through, and you create a package.json file. And this is just the file that tells what plugins you're using. This is the important part right here that we're looking at. At this stage, I'm pretty much going with some defaults from this.
Can you make that bigger?
I can.
That's better.
Does that help? I don't know if I need to make the whole screen. Well, you can any better. So early on Monday of this week, I ordered a fancy clicker and pointer. I was all excited. Got it on Wednesday. Was thrilled to use it for the first time, and then I forgot it. I'm hesitant to get into. I would have, but thank you. Browser sync. When I'm actually compiling the Sass, I'll show you kind of what that does. Gulp is the Gulp program. That's what we're really using. Auto Prefixer is a tool that add some prefixes for different browsers in your CSS, so you don't have to do it. We're not really going to see that work today. And then Gulp Sass, right? Gulp doesn't do Sass, right? Gulp runs tasks for you. the main task I want to get done is I want to compile Sass. So I have to add the Sass plugin to Gulp so that it knows to do that. And then we're going to actually add another plugin sort of live here for linting. And this linting is basically when an automated process goes through your code and looks for errors, style or syntax errors, and points them out to you. So that's basically your package JSON file. So once you've installed Gulp, the next piece of magic is your Gulp file, gulp.js. And gulp.js, how many people in here write functional JavaScript? I don't. So actually I want to, the theme that was, so this is the gulp.js file I'm working with today is about 82 lines here, a lot of which are comments. I opened up, oh, maybe I didn't. Here it is. This is the Gulp file from that theme that was running all those errors and stuff. And there's a bunch of stuff in here that I haven't quite figured out yet. I used this as a reference as I was creating my own Gulp file. I mean, I certainly used the tutorial helped me build it. I'm not a JavaScript programmer, but this is basically JavaScript. It's sort of a JavaScript script that's telling Gulp which tasks to run and sort of how to manage them. I was working on this last night with a friend of mine who's much better at JavaScript, and he was still struggling with what a few things in here are happening. You don't need to understand all of the code to sort of, if any of you are like me, you know this, right? That hacking a module, you don't always have to understand the whole module. You've got to understand the variable that you want to change and go in and change it, right? And so I'm not going to try and teach you this whole file because I don't 100% understand it, although I'm getting about 80 or 90% of the way there. But I figured out, where I can make some customizations that make it do the things I want. So first of all, the very first thing is in your gulp.js file, you have to tell Gulp which of those modules you want to use, and so that's the top part. So if I add a module, and actually we're going to add the lint module in a minute. I didn't take it out. If you're going to add a module, you have to add a variable for it. Then we basically have a series of functions that are just telling Gulp what to do and in what order. There's also, you can run, the way my original file was set up in that other site, if I just run Gulp, the command Gulp, it will go through the tasks once, and it will run all the tasks that I've assigned to it. If I do Gulp watch, Gulp is actually going to pay attention to my Sass directory, and anytime I make a change, it's going to go through this list again. I don't have to run Gulp each time I've made some changes, right? Gulp just watches my file, and it automatically runs it. And in here, we actually there's a function called Gulp default, and this is kind of telling Gulp what to do if you just run Gulp. And then there's another function called Gulp watch. Here it is. And this is telling Gulp what to do when you run Gulp watch. And this includes another function that has Gulp watching. And the other important thing in the Gulp file is you have to tell in this Gulp.js file, we're doing things like telling Gulp this is the Sass function, and Gulp has to know, well, where should I be looking for the Sass files that I'm going to that we're going to compile, and what are they called? So one of the problems I've had sometimes is, if I'm creating my own theme, I might name my main Sass file style.scss, and Gulp if I've just imported some configuration, it might be looking for styles.scss, so it can't find it, right? So I just have to go in here and say, oh, I'm not telling Gulp where the right file to look for is, and I have to change that. So I've set this up in my, I'm going to, it's a slight tangent, but which is to talk a little bit, if on my desktop I put Zen, so these are some of just the Zen files and all the files that go in them, and you don't, I'll see if, can I make this a little bigger too? The Zen Starter Kit, this is all, if I create a subtheme for Zen, there's all of these different folders in it. There's the CSS, there's the Sass. If you open up the Sass, there's a whole bunch of base components, forms, init, layouts. Each one of those has a bunch of subfolders. And so this is all the Sass that Zen provides me. And the sort of best practice I learned when I started working with Zen and Sass was to create another folder called custom, where I'm going to put my own components. So every time I compile the Sass, there's a whole bunch of stuff that Zen has provided for me, which gives me a default, and then it's going to, on top of that, it's going to add my overrides. When I created this theme, I just took out all of those overrides, or, the original theme. I took out, okay, no, this is still the, made the mistake, and now I got to navigate back. So in my SCCSS is just another abbreviation for Sass. In my SCSS file, I took out all of those. There isn't anything else except the components, and this really should have been custom. These are my custom components. I created a couple of. I created a footer Sass file, a header Sass file, and a typography one. I would create my own set here. And I might, if I were going to reuse this theme, do like Zen does. I might even steal some of theirs, or I might create some standard ones that I just want to use every time, and then just have a custom folder where I'm going to change things for this project. And then in my styles Sass file, this just says, go get, this should be made up of whatever's in those other custom folders. So it's bringing together all of the different sub files that I had, right? Does everybody know all of this stuff, or is this helpful to people? Just to check in. Yes, no? There'll be some feedback right now on, am I going too fast or too slow? Anybody I'm going too fast for? How many people well, I'm sure there's some people in this room. I know some of these people.
I can't read what you're doing up there at all. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yeah. And then the contrast of all the white, that I can read.
Okay.
Yeah.
So feel free to jump in if you have, and I know you have already. A lot of the details aren't so important, although I understand that it helps.
Okay, so what is this file?
This is my main Sass file,
Okay.
and this is where I'm defining all of the components. So
Okay.
all of the individual Sass files, I put an import statement, right? And so now it knows to get all of the Sass from all of these different files, and I just have the three.
And that's a components folder.
Yes,
Okay.
I've called it components here. You could call it whatever you like, right? When we actually run this in a second, I'll try to make it bigger, and some of this is going to make a little more sense, right? But part of why I'm saying all of this is that another part of creating this Gulp file is telling Sass sort of where to go and what to, so I'll make this bigger again. In the Sass function, I'm basically saying go and find this styles folder and compile that into CSS, right? So I just have to tell it, there's where my Sass is, compile that and convert it into CSS. Let's actually try something now. So if I get on the command line, first of all, I want to go back and look at this and remind us that I went ahead and got rid of there is nothing. I guess I have to display it this way. There's nothing in the CSS folder. It's empty. Oops. Because I deleted what CSS was in it. I'm going to go to the command line. I've navigated to the theme, and I'm just going to run Gulp. Oh, and I'm going to get a bunch of errors. Live demo. Sass link is not defined. Okay. This is easily solvable. Do I want to do that? I'm going to go ahead and do this a little bit differently. So what happened was I had deleted the Sass lint plugin so that I could show installing that, but there's some references to it, so it's broken. So let's just go ahead and install the plugin. Adding so now also just also in my theme folder, I just need to run npm install. Can I? There we go. So I just ran well, we got some errors. Let me just try this one more. Oh, I think this is the problem. Install Gulp Sass lint. There we go. So this is npm installing the Sass lint module. The Sass lint module is the one that's going to check for formatting. It's going to check for things like, do I have 2 spaces or 3 spaces, and tell me those things if I want that. I don't need that, but it's a possibility. So when I ran that, what npm did was it updated the package.json file, and it told package.json file that this is required. Part of the benefit of using a package manager like this, right, is I can save this package.json file and share it with colleagues. They can just run npm and install, and it will install exactly all of these modules and exactly the same versions of them, so that we have the same environment, so that we're using the same tool set. So we've added that to the package.json file, and then I also need to go to the gulp.js and say, Gulp, you need to know about this. So I add Sass lint and require that. Now I'm going to go back and try running Gulp again. And one of the things in the Gulp process was a browser sync. And so one of the tasks that Gulp is doing for me is when I run Gulp, it automatically opens up a browser window with the website that I'm working on, which is kind of a nice thing, right? And I told you I took out all of the theme stuff, and there's a couple of files with 2 or 3 simple Sass things right now, and basically they're adding borders to H1s and H2s so that we can just see that something happened. If I go back now, excuse me, if I go back to my theme, I have, well, first of all, that style CSS wasn't there before. So Gulp generated that, dropped it into the folder. If I open that up, let's see, the H1 currently is a 15-point solid pink border. If I go to my, find where I'm defining the H1 and change that to yellow, first of all, live demos. Oh, I spelled yellow wrong. That might be the problem. Gulp is watching. Let me try this one more time. Let's just change it to red. Okay, so Gulp, I changed the Sass file. If we go into the CSS, you'll see that Gulp rewrote the CSS and added and changed that to red. This is supposed to, and this has been a little bit flaky. I'm going to actually close this window. I'm going to stop Gulp and just run it again and have it open a new window, because what I'm trying to demonstrate is that if I do this, we should, if you look over here, so why is it working now?
Did you just have it run once, or you just have it watching?
It should be, even when I just run Gulp, it should be watching.
You're updating the style.css file.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, that's
Thank you. That has happened to me before. So we're going to update that, save it. So Gulp is not watching the CSS. It's watching the Sass. So when I changed the CSS, it doesn't do anything. When I changed the Sass, we could see Gulp down in the corner. It actually reprocessed it, and it changed. Now, if we go back, the H1 should be blue, and it is. This should have updated automatically in the background. It has been all morning when I tested this. So it's actually part of what Gulp is doing is automatically clearing the cache and refreshing the page for me, so I can see my changes immediately. So I just saved the Sass file. Gulp is compiling it into CSS, and it's updating the screen for me. But when this didn't work before, I just started over. Close that window. We'll try it one more time. Run Gulp. Gulp should be going through, compiling everything. It opens it up. So it's now blue. And then we'll try one more time and just change this to red. And watch up here in the upper right-hand corner, and in theory that should change as soon as I save. Or did I? No. Okay. It's not working automatically, but if I hit refresh, the change has been made. Judging from a lot of the silence, I'm thinking this might not be as beginner of a session as I thought it was. This has all been really, I think the main point that I would want to get across here is sort of how Gulp is working, how these modules are in there, and how you have some control over them, right? So I have a couple of options. I could go back for that theme at the beginning where I had all of those different processes running and all of these errors generating. I could go back and either just sort of rebuild that gulp file myself, or just try to edit it and change things. So that last module that I added, the linting one, is doing another thing, and this is where a lot of those errors were showing up in that GIF. If I go back to my screen and open this up, in addition to compiling the CSS, it's also giving me a bunch of warnings, and these are just sort of best practices in how to write your Sass. It's telling me things like the color red should be written in hexadecimal instead of using the word red. So if I go back to what it really wants me to do, well, we'll go ahead and do this. If I go back here and put in the hexadecimal instead of the word red and hit save, this should have reprocessed. And now that errors went away, but it's given me a new error that says colored literals such as FFFX should only be used in variables. So what it's really telling me is that instead of putting the either red or the hexadecimal here, is that, and this is a Sass thing, in Sass you can use variables, right? So in Sass I can define a variable called red and say that red is, this is the hexadecimal value for it, and then I can come in here where it was red and put in the variable. And if you haven't used Sass before, I can use this variable red all throughout my Sass, and if I want to change the shade of red a little bit, I just change the variable and it gets changed everywhere. So now if I save that, my Sass gets recompiled, and if we look over in the errors, there's no more errors about my use of red or hexadecimals. The linting program is now happy that I've done this the proper way. So that wasn't important, and that's a lot of those errors in that GIF we saw earlier are errors like that. It's like my Sass and my CSS worked just fine, but I wasn't following best practices, and Gulp is giving me a whole list of all the errors I was making. So I could it's like, well, I ought to be able to have or the ability to modify that, right? I ought to be able to say, I don't care about whether or not, well, here's an example. There's another, down here, there's a warning, and it's in my typography on line 17. It says no unit allowed for value of 0. In my typography on line 11, I have margin equals 0px. Well, it turns out that by strict definitions of this program, if you're using 0, you should not have any unit after it. It should just be 0 without any unit. If I had 10 pixels, that would be fine, but I shouldn't have 0. It is giving me a warning for that. Well, what if I don't care about that and I just want to tell Sass or Gulp to ignore that? How do I do that? So this was something I was just learning last night, and basically what I did was I went back to that theme where I had imported a pre-existing Gulp file and all the configuration, and I sort of picked at that and looked around at that, and I saw it had a little file in it called Sass .sass-lint YAML, and as I dragged that file down and opened it up, I noticed it's full of basically configuration, and it's got all kinds of different things that you might do in your Sass with little values next to them, and with a little experimentation. Let's see if I can make this bigger. Darn. I could just do probably that. A lot of these have numbers 0, 1, or 2, and through a little experimentation I figured out, and I'm sure I could have got documentation for this, that basically 0 says ignore this, 1 is give me a warning, and 2 is give me an error message. So you can kind of say whether you want to be alerted to this problem at all, and if so, how seriously do you want to be alerted to it? Is it just a casual warning, or is it an error message? I'm going to, I don't have that file right now in my, in the folder we're using, so I'm just going to copy that from this other theme that I'm in. I'm going to close these. And in my in the output here on the command line, Gulp had told me that this gave me a warning about this, and if I go over on the side, it's saying 0 units is that's basically the setting. So in my in this, I can look for 0 units. Oh, okay. There it is, 0 units. And 0 units is set to 2. If I change that to 1, save it, go back and recompile my... I'm going to do what Sass doesn't like and just put in a color here. Purple. I just need to make a change so that I can save it. No. That went... So, again, live demo. It looks like it was it didn't change the status of that like I expected. I'm going to try this one more time and just change that to 0. Actually, you know what? We might have to quit Gulp so it reads that file again. There we go. Now if I go back, I change that 0, the 0 units to 0, which means just ignore that. I recompiled the exact same Sass, and now I'm not getting any error message for the fact that I did not have, or that I had the words, the units PX. Actually, we are probably like over at our time. I had hoped to get a little bit of feedback and just, again, from the tone of the crowd, I'm getting that a lot of this maybe went too fast or wasn't clear enough. But
the next session starts at 11:45.
Okay, so we have a little more time.
Yeah, we've got about 10 more minutes for questions.
So first of all, if anybody has any questions for what I was showing you, that would be great. If you also just have like comments about your own experiences along these lines, or about sort of front-end workflows, these kinds of tools, I'd be happy to to have a discussion about them.
So, okay, so you are doing this for theming. So you do all of the install and modules for Gulp inside your theme folder? Is that it all happens inside your theme folder? Or do you
Yes.
install Gulp like globally across the system, and then it lets you use commands inside your theme folder? Or
So yes and no. So and Tess, jump in here and help me out, because this is an area I've been trying to figure out. So the Node Package Manager, that I install globally
Right.
on my system,
Right.
right? So I install that once, and I don't have to install that in every thing. I believe that I should be able to install Gulp globally too, although I've been installing it for each theme. So once the Node Package Manager is installed globally, I go into my theme and then I install Gulp, and it actually creates a Node Modules folder in my theme. If this wasn't there, then Node Package Manager will create it, right? This folder, Node Modules, that's all of the code that Gulp is using, and that gets added automatically
when you install
when I install Gulp. And then when I install like Gulp, Sass, lint, that goes into that folder as well. So all of my Node modules are stored in that folder. Now, if you're sharing this project with other people, you don't need to include, you'd want to put the Node modules folder in your get ignore. You don't want get to manage that folder, because you have the package JSON, which says this is the code that belongs in there. So I'm going to push this up to GitHub. I'm not going to include the node module folder. My friend Dan is going to download it, and he's just going to run npm install, and npm is going to look in that package JSON file, and it's going to see exactly what modules that is needed, and it's going to download them there. So he has exactly the same setup I do, even though we're not actually even including that code in the.
So do you need to edit the JSON to make sure that the dependencies are in there, or does it do it automatically when you install?
It does it automatically.
So installing npm will put that in your JSON file when you're installing, or Gulp does that?
When you have to create, when I created this
Yes.
theme, I had to create a package JSON file.
Right.
It just didn't have any modules in it.
Okay.
Right? We can. We want to go to here, right? If I go to my package JSON files,
Okay.
the dev dependencies, that's the list of modules that are in that folder, and the file has to be there already.
Okay.
But the node package manager will update it automatically.
Okay. So you can go in there and edit it, but
Yes.
also as you add things, it adds it to there for you automatically.
Right, and we're definitely getting beyond beginner stuff, and I'm not an expert at it, but for example, the little caret character here, that has to do with, for example, whether or not you're telling Node Package Manager that I want exactly this version, or I want this version or greater.
Sure.
So you might, you might have a different preference. Tasks or anybody, the little up character, does that mean exactly, or does that mean this or up, this or better? You don't know. So you can look that up, but I might decide, I want exactly that package, and the Node Package Manager might just be saying that package or better, and so I could just go in and edit this. I could change it to tell it what I want it to do next time. I'd have to do a little Googling to figure out what to
Sure.
tell it.
It's still kind of beginners because until you can actually get it working, you can't do anything. So.
Right. Does anybody feel like they can take this home and use it? I hope so.
Well, play with it.
If you have the time, if you're a themer and you don't understand how your theme is working, I recommend, if nothing else from this presentation, hopefully I've sort of modeled how somebody that you don't have to understand this all at the beginning, to sort of take it apart and start to just try to rebuild pieces of it piece by piece, and then understand them and experiment with them. Sort of taking apart my Gulp file and rebuilding it has been a super learning experience for me. And, there's a lot of things. So another example, yep.
Quick question. You might have already said this, and I might have just missed it.
It's okay.
So when you first install Gulp, do you get like a default gulp.js that you modify, or where do you find those? Because you said you have
Right.
one, and there's a lot of stuff.
When you run, trying to remember, with one of them, actually it's in, really use this blog post. It's an excellent blog post. This blog post actually has a sample Gulp file to start with.
Okay.
So I'm pretty sure I copied in either the package, the JSON file or the Gulp.js file. There was a script that I ran through, and it asked me 6 or 8 questions.
Okay.
And this describes how to do that. This blog post. So I ran, I think it was npm and or init. I think that's what it was. It's to create the package.json file.
It creates new modules and updates package.
So you run. So if there is no, that must basically run if there is none already. If you run.
Yeah, it doesn't create a gulp.js file. You have to.
Right.
You have to gulpfile.js. You have to create it.
So npm install. If you run that and there is no package file already, then it will walk you through a script to create it.
I believe so. But it'll at least compile that and create a log file.
Okay. So there is a way for either the Gulp or whatever to sort of walk through a script to create it, but like in this blog post, he basically creates the file or gives us a sample file anyways. And if you follow these instructions, you would figure that out. But
There's another great site as well from CSS Tricks
yes,
called Gulp for beginners.
Okay.
And I use that when I start my Gulp, which are really long, but it has a lot of good
okay.
example functions. And so it goes from the very beginning to the end. I would definitely recommend going through that and just messing around with it.
So another thing that isn't happening right now in my theme, and I have done this already in a different one, is creating the, if you use Sass at all, right, if you use Sass, one of the problems with this is if you want to inspect an element in the browser, you know, the browser will tell you sort of where the CSS is in your CSS file, but that's not really useful to you. You need to know where it is in your Sass file. And there's something, I don't know exactly what they're called, but maps of your CSS that say where that it all came from in the Sass. And then if you've configured your browser correctly, you can inspect an item and it will not tell you where it is in the CSS. It's going to tell you exactly which file and which line to find that Sass item. So when you want to go fix it, you can. This is not going to be sort of default out of the box.
There's a workaround. If you go to the site settings and you make it so it doesn't aggregate your CSS and your JavaScript, it'll show you which Sass files.
Yeah, but you still need to create the map, I think. Right.
That's how you get around that, and you can see the Sass files.
So, right, in Drupal, you don't want to aggregate your CSS and your, but right now that would not work on the site that I'm working on because I haven't generated the map, the Sass map. So, but there's a plugin for Gulp. It's called source map. That's what it is. So you have to generate a source map, and then what Gulp does is every time it processes your Sass, it creates a map and it says where everything is, so that when you go into an inspect element, you can get right to the Sass line that you need. Any other questions? No? Any other comments?
I'll just ask
Any other tips?
a generic question is what I have, was really just kind of, you talked about Sass and then linting, like what other kinds of things could you do with it? I'm sure there's a lot of things, but
Sass and linting, the style, I mentioned a few others. The style guide,
yeah.
things like resizing your images. There are libraries that will make your images responsive. There's the creating the map, which is sort of part of your Sass, but they're trying to think of some others. There are thousands of plugins for Gulp. So Gulp there's another thing called Grunt, which is similar to Gulp. I think from what I've heard, I've never used Grunt. I've heard that I think most people have moved to Gulp because it's faster or more efficient, but I'm sure there are Grunt fans out there. What else was I going to
If you can
say?
get the browser sync working, it's really cool, and it'll really make your life more efficient.
The browser thing was something that was kind of screwing me up for a long time, and I wasn't quite sure of the value of it. It wasn't actually until last night that I got it working so that I could actually see my changes immediately. I think it also does things where if you have two browsers open, it will sync the two browsers. So you can have like Safari and Firefox, if I understood it correctly. I haven't managed to do this, but if you have Safari and Firefox both open, it will update both of them at the same time. So you can, and if you scroll in one browser, it will automatically scroll in the other. So does that sound familiar? Has anybody done that?
I like it because it just refreshes what I have.
Right. I think that's the part I'm going to use, that's actually syncing between browsers. I'm not sure that it would be that useful to me. Okay, well, I think we pretty much used our time. Thanks for bearing with me. This is the first time I've done this presentation, and I have some ideas for fixing it. So please come and give me feedback later. I'm going to do a BOF today on Backdrop, if anybody's interested in that, at 12:45. I'm going to turn off the